Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Warsaw for the 12th edition of the Warsaw Security Forum. My name is Federica D'Alessandra, and I have the pleasure of being with you today and tomorrow again as the Master of Ceremony for the defense track. It is great to see so many of you returning for the 2025th edition of the forum. Of course, we're grateful particularly to our partner country this year, France, as well as all partners of the forum for allowing us to be back together. This year's theme, Divided We Fall, really could not be timelier. Across the world, a new era of instability has entrenched itself, with high-level intensity conflicts erupting in many strategic regions of the world on a scale that we've really not seen in decades. As always, risks of escalation remain a concern, while the staggering toll of many of contemporary conflicts, particularly those in Gaza and Ukraine, remind us all that ultimately it is the civilian populations that pay the heaviest price of any military confrontation. That is why, as exercising restraint, upholding international law, and sustaining diplomatic efforts is crucial to stabilize a world on edge. But we also know that the security threats that we face in this landscape are extremely real and that they demand action. Despite recent U.S. attempts at mediation, Russia remains undeterred, continuing its unrelenting assault in Ukraine, pounding at cities, targeting civilian infrastructure, maiming its civilian population on a daily basis. And it's also growing willing, or at least reckless, to engage in unprecedented risk-taking behavior. In August, the EU and British Council buildings in Kyiv, long thought to be off limits, were struck during one of its countless attacks in the Ukrainian capital. Russia's hybrid campaign against European and NATO members also continues to escalate. Political interference, cyber attacks, information warfare, espionage, sabotage, and other clandestine operations, including against critical infrastructures such as undersea cables, have become more frequent. That is why in January, NATO bolstered its military presence in the Baltic Sea to improve the alliance's ability to respond to such destabilizing acts through Operation Baltic Sentry. And yet, as we saw this month, such acts continue to grow in pace, baseness, and intensity. Over the last weeks, repeated breaches of European airspace, including by Russian drones and fighter jets, led to an even stronger NATO response, including Article 4 consultations and the launch of Operation Eastern Sentry. Additional breaches of European airspace and repeated drone sightings over sensitive infrastructure in EU member states have also led the European Commission to announce plans for a drone wall to better protect the continent through improved detection and cost-efficient countermeasures. NATO is a defensive alliance, and the European Union is at its core a peace project. But both have made it clear that regional security is paramount. And faced with growing threats, European capitals are stepping up to shoulder more responsibility for the continent's defense, achieve credible deterrence, bolster resilience, and improve combat readiness. Among other instruments, the EU has announced the Rearm Era plan to achieve readiness by 2030, while the NATO Hague Summit, European allies committed to increase defense spending to 5% to close the gap in transatlantic burden sharing. However, achieving collective security objectives requires more than simply implementing spending pledges, and many challenges do lie ahead. Weapons shortages and an inadequate domestic production capacity, for example, have exposed the depth of European dependence on U.S. assets at a time when U.S. strategic priorities are being reevaluated, and we might face the possibility of redeployments of some of these assets in other regional theaters. This, of course, calls for developing new European defense capabilities, not just through more spending, but through smart spending, coordinated investment, and better integration. This is a momentous time for Europe and European and security defense, and European countries do have an opportunity to act as force multiplier for each other's unique strength, complement them, and pursue collective strength in an efficient and effective way. So over the next 2 days, we will be discussing all of this, the challenges and opportunities that this moment presents, right here at the defense track, which will occur here in the Chicago stage on both days. And because we have a long and very intensive and remarkable program to get through, without further ado, allow me to please welcome on the stage our first panel moderator, former commander of the U.S. Army Europe and member of the Warsaw Security Forum International Advisory Council, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. General, you have the stage. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We have 55 minutes to solve all of Europe's security problems. Fortunately, we've got 5 people that have answers on how to do that. So we're going to get right into it. The title, of course, is Levée en Masse 2.0, Can Europe Rebuild Its Military Power in the Land Domain? So the focus is going to be land-centric, but we're not limited to or restricted to that because nobody on the land wants to fight without air power and sea power, obviously. I'm going to start off with Dr. Claudia Mayor. She is the Senior Vice President for Transatlantic Security of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Claudia, I'm glad she just ran from the airport here, so she's probably the only person here capable of doing that. Germany's Defense Minister Pistorius talks about the necessity to be ready for war. Kriegstüchtig. What does that mean, and how do Germans perceive it?
It's actually a very interesting word because when he said that in the German public debate, there was a huge outcry. And the biggest criticism was that he talked about ready to war, not ready for defense. And that actually shows you that although the world is changing, Russia is attacking Ukraine, the US is changing, and we have a huge change in the geopolitical landscape, mentalities change much slower. So Germany might increase its defense spending, give up the debt brake on defense spending, going to 3.5%, 153 billion in 2029, but the mindset change is much slower. And I think one of the reasons Pistorius threw this word in the German debate was to change mentalities, because everybody was commenting upon that. And so you make people think about it, debate about it, and hopefully make progress on why defense is necessary. For me, kriegstüchtig, or ready for war, has 3 dimensions. It's the armed forces that are ready, equally equipped, train as you fight. The second dimension is the industry, an industry that can deliver quickly on scale. And the third dimension is the society, a society that understands the necessity of defense and is willing to support defense courses. And if you don't have the society with you, you see it in Ukraine, a long defense effort will not work. So I think it was a really helpful tool to make progress in the German debate, because if you don't change mentalities, you will not get the long-term sustainable support for defense efforts.
So the German Bundeskanzler, Friedrich Merz, said that he wanted Germany to have the largest conventional force in Europe. So also bold leadership from the German government. How do Germans perceive that? How do you explain why do we need to have the biggest conventional force in Europe?
I mean, to be very honest, my first thought was like, what about Ukraine? What about Turkey? But let's take it as a bold statement from the German Chancellor. I think the first reaction, again, coming back to the mindset change in Germany, was a little hesitation. Isn't it too much? But most allies kind of reassured Germany that being the conventional backbone for deterrence in Europe is actually a task that is necessary, and Germany is good to do that. Can they really do it? I think that's a crucial question. This government came into power in May. So I find it a pretty short time to really assess it. But you could look at the ambitions, and the ambitions that Merz, the new chancellor, outlined are clearly there. Biggest conventional army, and he wants to move Germany from being a sleeping middle power to a leading middle power. So there is a clear political ambition, and if you look at the role that Merz has been playing in keeping the Europeans together with regard to Ukraine, organizing meetings ahead of the Alaska meeting and others, he is playing that leadership role. So there's an ambition, first point. Second point, does he actually have the resources to do so? And there something really amazing happened, I would say. In March this year, Germany decided, or the government decided, to change the constitution in order to exempt all defense spending above 1% from the famous debt brake, and to put into place a 500 billion euro special budget on infrastructure, mainly to fix the outdated infrastructure that is necessary for defense. If your bridge doesn't work, your tank will not move. And with those two financial decisions, Germany put itself in the position to really spend more on defense. And if you look at the all European countries, allies, it is one of the rare countries able to do so. If you look at the Hague summit, we had still 9 countries who don't spend 2%. Many countries who don't want to spend 3.5 or can't afford to spend 3.5. So there is a huge responsibility for Germany to get it right. So ambition is there, money is there. Will they really do it? I mean, this is what we are now all out waiting for. I personally would love to see it more change, more quickly, more substantially. But I think at least the conditions are set, and now we have to keep our fingers crossed that it really works.
Okay, well, maybe when we come back on the second round, a couple of specific things that might need to happen in Germany that would reflect changing that culture at the people level. Lord Coaker, Minister of State for Defense from the UK. Sir, I live in Frankfurt, Germany, and I have British friends talk about Europe as if it's another place, but yet I always thought of UK being a part of Europe. Maybe it doesn't matter, but what is UK's role for the defense of Europe?
Well, we've been very clear with respect to the UK's role in Europe, and we in our strategic defence review, which was published recently, we laid out that for us the priority for the UK government is NATO first. NATO will be the priority. Defence of Europe is a priority. It's not the only thing that we're concerned about. It's not NATO only, but NATO first is that. And so it's a very, very clear declaration of where the UK is. And I think within the context of what we see this morning from the brilliant speeches we had this morning, that is really, really important. And of course, alongside that, we have the relationship we have with the United States. We talk frankly with the United States. They talk frankly with us. And you've seen what our Prime Minister has said about trying to act as a bridge, sometimes with respect to the US and Europe. But we're fully committed to Europe and to that NATO first policy. And we're working hard within Europe to ensure that when President Trump turns around to us and says Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defence, we can demonstrate as the UK that we're doing that. And as our German colleague just said, Germany and others on this panel are also doing that. Europe is now stepping up in a way. We're in Poland, and look at the magnificent way that Poland is stepping up. But all of us are now stepping up to meet the responsibilities that we have to defend Europe against the aggression we see from Russia, and the UK will play a leading role in that, and explicitly stated that through its strategic defence review.
Sure, thanks. And certainly the U.S. Army always counted on the British Army to have a corps headquarters, a warfighting division headquarters, and to be a part of the enhanced forward presence battle groups and so on, and you're still doing that. The relationship with France, which is our guest host nation for this particular Warsaw Forum. Of course, UK and France together are in the CJEF, the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force, but UK also leads the JEF, which is the more Scandinavian-oriented. Could you talk about how do you see these sub-NATO regional groups contributing towards deterrence and security?
Well, I think it's a very important question. I mean, clearly NATO is the overarching strategic framework within which we all operate. But within that, you have these various bilateral and multilateral arrangements which seek to complement what NATO is seeking to do. So if you take CGEF, which stems from the Lancaster House Agreement that France and the UK signed a decade or so ago, that framework has enabled us to move forward very closely with France, particularly if we use the current crisis that we face with the coalition of the willing that France and the UK are leading to try to ensure that we have security guarantees with whatever may follow with respect to Ukraine is a really good example of how bilateral relationships can strengthen the work going on within Europe and strengthen that NATO alliance without undermining it. If you look at the JEF arrangement, which clearly concentrates with respect to the Baltic area, the Joint Expeditionary Force there, set up to defend not only against the threat, as we see from Russia in a land sense. You mentioned, sir, about some of the other threats, but what we've seen in the Baltic with respect to some of the new types of warfare that we're seeing, the underwater, the defence of underwater cables, the defence of energy, all of those sorts of things are going to become increasingly important. And we've seen through Baltic Sentry and Nordic Warden and other types where the JEF nations have cooperated together using their particular expertise in different areas to defend Europe in that sense. And I would say, if we talk about that area, isn't it good to see Finland and Sweden now part of NATO? Putin thought he undermined NATO when with his illegitimate and illegal attack on Ukraine. I don't think he for one moment expected Finland and Sweden, as a consequence of that, to join NATO. And they're very welcome in it and strengthen NATO and strengthen the whole of our defence in Europe against Russia.
Could I ask, what's the discussion in UK about dealing with these gray zone type activities, drones flying all around Danish airports and seaports? I think UK, Ireland is dealing with some of this. Where's the government now on rules of engagement? How do you deal with those kind of activities?
Well, certainly, if you look at drones, and let's talk about the drone threat. We've seen the reaction with respect to Poland and the action that was taken, the NATO action that was taken with respect to the drones in Polish airspace, but also we've seen drone activity in other parts of NATO. And what we have to do is to deter that from happening, to confront that happening without going into the rules of engagement for reasons you can understand too closely. But Russia needs to know it's testing the NATO alliance. It's testing us to see whether we have the strength of resolve to stand up against that sort of action. And what we've seen in Poland and what we've seen in other parts of NATO, I would suggest, says to Russia strongly, we will not be frightened. We will not be deterred from defending ourselves and defending our airspace. We will do it proportionately. We will do it appropriately. But let's be clear that we will confront that and take the necessary action in order to deter it from happening. And I think by Russia knowing that, just finished with this point, sir, I think one of the things that we're all rediscovering, and they'd be interested in the views of others on the panel, is the importance of deterrence. But the whole point of deterrence is people have to believe that you will take action. That's the credibility of deterrence, is a belief that you will take action. And I think it's fair to say that we're rediscovering the importance of deterrence. And by preparing for war, you sometimes prevent war.
Thank you, sir. Next is Chris Brown, Vice President of Global Strategy for General Dynamics Land Systems. Chris, of course, there's a lot of work going on in Europe, inside the European Union, but also in the nations for localization, to not be dependent on the U.S. or supply chains with other countries. How does GD Land Systems approach our allies about helping them find the right balance between localization, maybe not so much dependence, but also getting the best possible technology and quality?
Yeah, it's a pretty complex question, because what's involved.
That's my specialty is really
what's
hard.
Involved there is a series of decisions. I mean, what we've been talking about here is the mobilization of populations in support of increased military spending and growing your militaries. We talked about the importance of deterrence. And behind deterrence is the industrial capabilities to make sure that your equipment is ready to work and it's fit for purpose. And therein are a number of challenges that we're seeing with our customers and we're seeing with our users as they navigate these choices under very compressed timeframes. So last year, their big theme was at this conference, deterrence and ready to fight tonight. So as Poland is going through this massive modernization of their military, and you see this return of the rest of the NATO alliance to this ability to really create deterrence along this eastern flank, what is that industrial base behind it that backs up that team? And you throw that requirement into a politicized space of how you buy military equipment. And most politicians are looking to create jobs with military spending. It's just a fact. It's not a value statement. It's just a reality. And so the balance of creating the maximum amount of localization but getting the maximum amount of military capability into the hands of the warfighter is extremely important. What we've seen in our experience here is that it's, in fact, a balance. You've got to find the best of what a country can deliver in terms of their capabilities, matched with some importation of capability from one of your partners. And frankly, there's this third space, which is there's no textbook for, there's no playbook for, which is you allow partners to evolve and adjust to the situation. We just heard President Zelensky talk about capabilities that are iterating in 30, 60, 90-day cycles. There's no playbook for that. The current threat doesn't allow it. What we're seeing in our industrial space is without formal partnerships or agreements, companies are getting together informally, working problems and solutions, and delivering those to countries like Poland and others so that they can deliver rapid capabilities into their force. But back to the question, it's going to be a balance. It's going to be a balance of what you can produce locally combined with something that you get offshore. And what's most important for countries like Poland is that they've got a capability to contribute back into the alliance. What we're so excited about in our emerging position here in Poland is that Poland is actually contributing deterrence back into the alliance. They're not drawing deterrence from the alliance. It's an amazing achievement that Poland's been able to create in just a short amount of time.
Thanks for that. How about technology transfer? Is there a more openness to transferring technology, say, from U.S. companies to customers in Europe and vice versa, or is that a major hindrance?
Yeah, so it's all about your frame of reference. There's if you look in this part of Central and Eastern Europe, there was a long-standing tradition of full localization. So if you get a technology data package and you'd build 100% of that capability within your country, there's really in the, I'd say the western part of the alliance, there's no real tradition of that level of localization. There's really no main combat vehicle or fighter jet or naval ship that has 100% content from that country. We are really in a battle on the industrial sense with our adversaries on the with the threat. It's supply chains versus supply chains, and you can see how our adversaries are adjusting their supply chains rapidly, and so the strength is how do you have redundant, complementary supply chains that can manage multiple threats. And so this is where I think a country like Poland has so much to contribute. As we're developing suppliers across Poland for not just the Abrams programs that they're purchasing now, but for other General Dynamics programs around the world, what we're finding are world-class capabilities here. And so I think the answer for localization is you've got to localize what you absolutely have to have, but be pragmatic that it shouldn't be, nor can it be 100%, and have a view to what can you contribute back into the supply chains that you're joining. And there's, I think, not just General Dynamics, but other major primes that are involved here in Poland are experiencing is some of their global capability is now sourced completely from Poland. And I think that's the pattern for the future.
Next is Lieutenant General de Courrèges. He's the director of the Institute for Higher National Defense Studies. Sir, when I read that our panel was going to be on Levée en masse, I had to Google it. I couldn't remember exactly what the phrase meant, but then I remembered being a young major at the Staff College, and it all came back to me. The notion of a levée en masse refers to the French Revolution and the unique ability to change both the character of warfare as well as the origins of soldiers. How does that historical precedent resonate for a 21st century professional French Army officer?
So firstly, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel and share our understanding of the changing threat environment. So you asked me about levée en masse. Levée en masse refers to a specific moment of the French Revolution in 1794, when France was facing multiple external threats and domestic uprisings. One motto emerged at this moment: the defense of la patrie, motherland. I see a particular resonance there. When your enemies are closing in, when your core values are at stake, then everybody has to stand up and fight. In 2025, Europe and France are very different. That's true. But history illustrates how peace is fragile. I belong to a generation deployed overseas with UN and NATO mandates. That is really different from standing on your territory to defend it. So in conclusion, I would say we are not on a time of a wake-up call. We are more on a time to change our mindset.
So thanks. France has just published its strategic review for 2025. From a threat perspective and rapidly changing geopolitical standpoint, the document mentions Europe's strategic awakening. What do you mean by a strategic awakening, and is this somehow connected to strategic autonomy?
So we can observe that wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, as well as the crisis in Iran, are acute symptoms of global instability. That's true. Here in Poland, we feel the Russian threat very clearly. It puts at risk the European continent. It is not just the war of aggression in Ukraine. It is Russia using all means at its disposal to undermine support for Ukraine and challenge the international orders for its own benefit. More globally, we observe the uninhibited use of force, which can be observed in the Near, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and elsewhere. And the terrorist threat remains very real. So France believes that Europeans have to rely increasingly on their own strengths. There are some doubts about the solidarity of alliances. So we need to bring step by step about a European revolution. Europeans must develop the assets for autonomy and self-sufficiency and achieve the depth, mass, and scale they need. Strategic autonomy means that we devote more resources to our defense and security so that we can collectively take on those responsibilities. What does that mean? It means, firstly, promoting balanced burden sharing for Europe's security. Secondly, pursuing dialogue with the United States for action and the European contribution to the continent's security. Thirdly, referencing NATO's European pillar. It means compensating for the effects of a possible reduced American engagement while safeguarding the continent's security. Together with other Europeans, France will continue to give substance to this pillar by demonstrating Europeans' ability to act for the defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. Finally, acquiring critical capabilities to be able to conduct high-intensity operations independently in Europe and within NATO. Missile defense, deep strike capabilities, suppression of enemy air defenses, strategic enablers, early warning system and command and control. This means being able to move from burden sharing to burden shifting while preserving the cohesion of the islands. Bottom line, we are Team Europe.
Sir, thank you. So what you just said gave me an idea for, on the second round, I'll go around and ask each of our panelists to not predict whether or not the U.S. will reduce its presence in Europe, but from a professional analysis, if the U.S. does, what would that mean for Germany, UK, France, Poland, and even U.S. industry? How would you have to compensate, or what would you need to compensate? I'm asked all the time, oh my God, what if the U.S. leaves, or can Europe deter Russia? And I would say the combined economies and industries and technologies and populations of Europe, including not just the EU, but Norway, UK, and Canada, is like 15 times more than what Russia has. So it would seem to be, it's not a matter of those capacities. So I'll ask you just to be thinking about a shortish answer when we come back. And also a heads up to my microphone guys, after I ask General Błazeusz a question, I would like to ask for a couple of people if you wanted to ask a question here versus waiting till the end, because I want to make sure you have that opportunity. Zeus, General Błazeusz, who I've known for a long time, is before he had gray hair, just finished a tour as a commanding general of the Eurocorps in Strasbourg, and he's in transition to a new assignment. Zeus, you've been studying Russia for your whole professional life. What is their approach to mass, to a levée en masse, and how do you defeat that?
Well, thank you. Easy question as always. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, the Russian approach, in my opinion, to the creating mass, on one hand, didn't change. When you look how they created and used mass in Finland in 1940, when they invaded Finland, how they created mass at the end of World War II, when despite all the technological innovations, Germany could not basically stand against the Soviet mass. This was also the idea during the Warsaw Pact, that even though NATO is technologically advanced, but it has less tanks, it has less anti-tank missiles. So the Russians, the idea was we'll send as many tanks as they have. NATO will kill, let's say, 80, 85, 90%, but this 10% will get through. The other example is Ukraine. They are still using a sheer mass to create the effect, paying enormous price quite often in equipment and human. And again, remember, total disregard for their own soldiers' lives. It still didn't change throughout the decades. And this is how Russians are approaching. And they are in Ukraine, unfortunately, making those small gains, few kilometers, once in a while, paying huge price. But they don't care because they still have the resources. They still did not mobilize all of their own reserves. They still are able to manufacture equipment. It's not as high quality as it used to be. It doesn't have all the foreign components as it used to have, but it's still a tank that you need to kill one way or the other. However, on the other hand, what we are observing is because most of the forces are tied up now with the war in Ukraine, the Zapad was on a very low scale, as we all have observed. So what they did, they created another dilemma to show that, okay, we maybe did not send this time a few hundred 1,000 soldiers to the Zapad, did not exercise in a number of locations, but they sent the drones, as you know, the incursion to the Polish airspace, and they showed that, hey, we're still capable of causing you a dilemma. And this is what they are doing. Not having enough mass on this direction, they are creating those strategic dilemmas. The best example is Poland, our Belarusian border. Right now, because of this very innovative, disruptive application of the migration tool, basically weaponization of the migration, because it's a state-sponsored business for Russia and unfortunately Belarus, we have about equivalent of 2 brigades tied up at this border to protect it. And look at the other side. There's not even 1 battalion facing us or threatening. So in a way they are smart. They cannot create mass here for the moment in this direction. However, they are causing a lot of havoc and a lot of trouble for all of us. Drones was one example. The Belarusian border is another one. We hear about the subs showing up in different locations, right? We hear about the cyber attacks. The cyber war is ongoing. If anybody has any doubt, talk to some specialists. This is a daily business for all of our nations and our governments, fighting off all those cyber attacks. And just think about little things, that it doesn't have to be a military threat. Even if you turn off the banking system, meaning the card system, for a few hours, this is terrible for our societies, because most of us do not carry cash with us anymore, right? So think about it. This system is attacked, it's blocked for a few hours, you cannot pay for the taxi, you cannot buy food, you cannot order anything online. So they have those tools, they are polishing them, and our main challenge is that we're still in peacetime, okay? We're still democratic societies. It's difficult. Denmark now imposed no-fly zone for basically no drone flying during those few periods of the summit that's happening there. But then, are you able to enforce it? And those are our main challenges. So basically, to sum up, I would say that the key to the success to face the Russian mass is obviously the unity. But unity, not only whole of government, but also the industry, the society, all of us have to be on board and understand the threats and basically prepare for them. Don't be surprised that Russians will be finding out new ways of causing this strategic dilemma. They have a lot of advantages. They know our European system. They've been in the system for over 20 years. They've been in NATO. They really fully understand how European Union and NATO operate. And they are finding those seams between us as allies, as member states of the European Union, and trying to explore them. Sometimes they're a little bit successful because, for example, getting an agreement on certain round of sanctions or certain directional directions for support for Ukraine are sometimes very difficult. But again, this is a political issue that I will not touch on. So for us, the most important, apart from the ones I mentioned, is flexibility and adaptability. Because the enemy is showing that even we come up with a counter system or how we can counter what they are doing to us, very soon they will find other ways. You heard about the recent attack on the Cisco system, right? Quite successful apparently, that the Russians were able to break in and get some of the data. This is a never-ending story. We have to be prepared, and our societies and governments have to understand that even though we buy state-of-the-art systems, first, the time of delivery, if it's in a few years, they may be already somehow a little bit outdated. Second one, they need to be open systems that allow to first be plugged into the other systems, but also the ones that are easily modernized and brought up to speed. And I think looking at Ben, he's giving me the signals, Zeus, stop. But one last point. Flexibility, adaptability, but everything has to be wrapped in the innovation and enabled with the AI. This is not the future, this is happening. We've seen some of the operations in Ukraine already performed, and in Russia by Ukraine, and at the battlefield, so this is happening.
Thanks. Okay, I've seen a couple of hands already. What I'd like to do is, have a microphone guy? I'm the microphone guy. Okay, you go to this gentleman right here, right in front of the camera, and then Ben, you go first. Say your name and your organization.
Okay, sorry, Benjamin Tallis from Helsing. Thanks, Ben. It's been great to see Germany now moving far faster and further than it was before. Many of us here in this room have been calling for that for a long time. But Claudia, how does Germany actually get the capabilities that we need for a solid European deterrence in the time we have? And to Lord Coaker, how can the UK keep pace with that? And when can we expect to see UK defence spending match the ratio outlined in the Strategic Defence Review of 20% going to survivable, 40% to attritable, and 40% to disposable capabilities? Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And before I come to that, maybe one general comment, if I may, Ben. Sure. I think there's mostly agreement on the panel. And in the same time, I feel like we lack the urgency. We agree on what we have to do. We also agree we have to do more burden shifting, burden sharing. But at some point, I wonder, we have, particularly if you're now here in Poland, we have a nuclear underpinned war right behind the border. We have an American ally where we don't know whether he wants to be an ally anymore. And if we have that urgency, all what we are discussing is too slow. And we talked about restoring deterrence after the drone incident in Poland. Restoring deterrence means telling the Russians, don't even dare, because the cost you will have are higher than the win you are hoping for. So don't. Eastern Sentry has been sent up in 3 days, which is amazing. 32 allies have to agree politically and militarily. Is Eastern Sentry really deterring Russia? Deterrence happens in the mind of the adversary. Do we really freak out Russia with what we do with Eastern Sentry? If you look at the mix in the Estonian airspace, if you look at the drones in Norway and in Denmark, I wonder. And for me, that is the urgency we need to think about. We are moving, or we need to move from a US-led defense in Europe to a European-led defense in Europe. Hopefully without a deterrence gap. If you look at political leadership, conventional mass, nuclear deterrence, and industry, doing that move from US-led defense to European-led defense takes us about 10 or 15 years if we spend 3.5 or more on defense. Who is doing that in Europe? The Baltic countries, Poland. The big countries are slowly moving there. So sometimes I wonder that in all the debates where we mostly agree, which I already really, really like because it has not always been the case, starting with my country, I think we lack the urgency of the situation. And that brings me to your question, Ben. We all know what needs to be done. It's on the political level, giving the orders, speeding up the decision-making processes. Procurement has changed a little bit in Germany, but it's also to the industry. In some industry, the books are full, but they don't deliver quickly enough. Moving the industry from a culture of excellence, where we did small little things, very fancy, to a culture of mass, where you produce quickly. We haven't really done it. It's not only a political problem, it's also an industrial problem to move quicker. So I think the homework is known. It has to be done. You said short answer, so I stop.
That was a German short answer. Okay. Lord Coaker.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thanks a lot. Ben, I think, as you'll be, well, you know the trajectory. The trajectory of spending has been laid out and will result in billions of pounds just over the next year or two on additional defence spending by April 2027 and then into the next Parliament. But also in the defence industrial strategy we've published, we accepted that we will do all we can to meet the NATO objective of in 2035 of 5%. I think the other thing, just in that, if I can digress slightly, the really important point, Ben, I think, is it's not only defence spending in the accepted sense of the word, it's to do with 3.5 of the 5 is defence, 1.5 is like homeland defence, cyber defence, all of the sorts of other things around security of homeland, which is becoming increasingly important in the new geopolitics and the new threats that we all face. So I think that is an important thing. And the one other thing I think, just to digress slightly as well, I think politicians like me as well need to continue to make the case to our, and I'll speak about the UK public, I'll leave others to discuss with their own countries. But I think in terms of the UK, people like me need to continue to make the case that defence spending and increases in defence spending are important to the people of that country as much as hospitals, pensions, schools and all of the other things. That debate has to be won and argued for as well. And I think that is really important. If you want billions of pounds worth of extra, why spend it on that? And that's why we have to show that the threat to cables, I think one of our colleagues on the panel, the threat to cables and energy and all of those things, the underwater and the cyber attacks, all of those things, they threaten people in their own homes now and will threaten them increasingly in the future. And therefore, the spending that we want, we justify on the basis that it's in the interests of the citizens of those countries. They know that in Poland and on the eastern side of Europe because of the fear of invasion and the fear of attack and what we've seen on the very real frontier of it. We in the UK and others further away have to understand that's why we support the eastern areas of Europe, because they're right on the front line. But we're on the front line in terms of cyber, in terms of energy, in terms of all those things as well. So we have to justify that spending as well as see that we get that increase in spending that we need.
Thank you, sir. Right here in the middle.
Robert Pszczell, Center of Eastern Studies, also formerly NATO. I want to press the panel. This is supposed to be about land forces, right? So, Claudia, all due respect, you know, Germany has a problem fielding 5,000 in Lithuania. You know, France, wonderful modernization. UK, still lowest numbers of land forces. In other words, where are the land forces are going to come from? And the suspicion we have in Poland, it's a very Polish question, is that there is an assumption that, you know, it's essentially Ukraine, of course, Poland, right? And US, when it's still there. And we still have Americans providing the largest numbers on the eastern flank. So without disagreeing with everything has been said, you know, to use the term which is important, Coaker, I mean deterrence, sorry, but, you know, we need land forces, not at the scale of the Cold War, but still substantial.
Okay, so this is a fair question. Zeus, I'm going to start on your end, and then we'll come all the way back. I'll give all five a chance to comment. Very briefly, please. What can Poland do to increase land capability? And then I'd ask the same question. Particularly, I think the question is about manning. Fill in the ranks. Zeus.
Well, Robert, good to see you. First of all, let me say that I think it's important what the current ComLandCom is saying. We really do not need more land formations. We really need to make them combat credible. We need to make sure all of them have the enablers they need. Because having just soldiers will not let us win the war, because we need all this, as we call, logistics tail. We need to make sure we'll have the fuel, ammunition. We will be able not only to receive those troops coming in, but also reconstitute the ones that were in combat. And very honestly, the whole host nation issue in NATO has been a little bit neglected. It always was considered only the host nation responsibility. Nowadays, there's a lot of discussions, a lot is going in the right direction, that we will need also those troops coming in along with the combat troops. What Poland is doing. Poland is obviously increasing the size of its armed forces, but also is heavily investing in new modern equipment. As you know, apart from the special forces, our other expert part is the cyber defense. We have one of the top-notch cyber defense units that it's constantly engaging with the enemy. Along with this, I would mention this idea, this concept, I would say, of better implementing the NATO defense planning. You probably heard the name. In NATO, defense planning is not about the war plans. This is the operational planning. This is more about planning the capabilities for the near and long term. So this eastern flank defense line that's being promoted by the ComLandCom, current one, General Donahue, talks about not creating another concept, not creating another niche. It's rather talks about getting the capabilities we need a little bit faster, but also the ones that can provide the same effect, but could be obtained by the countries faster, cheaper, and much in much bigger quantity than the normal process.
Let me get a French answer to the question: manpower. What is France doing to grow the size, or do you think it needs to?
Ben, before you cut me off on Poland,
I already did.
The manpower. No, please, very quick. We are really heavily, we've been really changing our procedures to get the soldiers in. We learned that from the moment a citizen says, I want to join, to the moment when he's or she actually admitted, this is the crucial moment. You need to shorten it to the maximum level to get that person in. Because quite often, if it's longer than a month, that person thinks, no, I changed my mind. Thank you.
Sir, France, manpower, how are you doing?
Well, we have not to, we don't want to change the strength of our current army, but we want to change the number of reservists. It means the former MOD, Mr. Lecornu, want to raise the number of reservists of 100,000, sorry, up to 2030. Because we have to reinforce the capacities of the army, but when the time asks that. But I think we spoke a lot about industry, spoke a lot about the strength of the army. I think one of the key points is to the rearmement moral, you know. It's to give the conscience of all the citizens of the democracy that they have to deter the enemy. And in fact, the former showed in France, as to say, to win the war before the war. And in fact, it means we have to ask all the citizens to defend their liberties, their freedom, their democratic system. I think this is the key point. It's not the key point, it's not only the strength of the army. It's to give the conscience that all the citizens has to say to the autocrats, we will defend our democratic system. And if we do that, we will be very strong to deter any attack on our territories. In conclusion, I would say that one of our current difficulties is we face an urgency, and we face a long time shift. So we have to manage both this system. We have to ask to the urgency with the drones and so on, and we have to build another European defense system. And it's a difficulty we face nowadays.
What's the percentage of female soldiers in the French military? Just ballpark.
I think we are, I don't know if it was the third or the fourth army with the high level of female officers, NCOs and private. So I think we enter them on all the level, on all the services, apart the foreign legion.
Okay, thank you. Chris, so you have companies in Poland, you have employees that might be Polish employees or whatever that work for GD. Is it the policy, or do you know if they're also reservists in the Polish military or the Romanian military or whichever country where you have a partner, that they are allowed, they don't lose their job if they go to do their reserve duty? That's not your normal purview, but I'm trying to think.
I think what I would just generally say that is, as we build out our Polish workforce, we're doing much of our work here in Poland through our partners at PGZ and WZM in Poznan, which is a fantastic hub of armored vehicle technology, great community. We support reservists throughout our workforce around the world, and so whatever army they belong to, whether it's the British Army or the Australian Army or the Canadian and U.S. Army Marine Corps Reserve, they get their full support. But on the topic of mobilization, if I could, and I would just add to the conversation that when you think about mobilization, most countries are thinking about it in terms of personnel and training systems and material and growing that industrial capability. I would argue that it's not just about getting more equipment. So in the context of the Polish land forces and the question that was asked, is it how many tanks do you have, or is it how many tanks are ready to go? Because if your tanks are at 50% readiness, or your armored vehicles are ready at 50% readiness, you need double the amount of equipment just to create the same amount of combat power. And so to overuse a statement that I'm sure every general in the room has used is amateurs talk tactics, left flanking, right flanking. Professionals talk logistics. What is the logistics setup behind this modern equipment across NATO, but particularly to the question about Poland? What are the logistics setups that are behind the system to make sure that those tanks are ready to go? And the logistics systems that work best are the combination of maximizing local capability and complementing it with partner capability from outside of Poland.
Thank you. Lord Coaker.
Well, just on the question about Poland, I mean, our colleague will know that there's a new treaty which will be signed hopefully by the end of the year between Poland and the UK, a part of which will be a new defence plan which will seek to address some of the concerns that underline the question that you've quite rightly asked. I would say in terms of British troops, I'm going to see the British troops in Poland tomorrow, meet the US officer who's also working with them as a statement. And in terms of the UK-Poland, which was the specifics of your questions, of course it's about troops, but the strength of the relationship between the UK and Poland, as well as others, I think is a really strong, powerful one, sends a real clear message to Russia, but is also not only about troops, but is about the increased industrial cooperation between our countries, whether it's frigates that we've seen, whether it's the air defence systems that we've seen, or the recent munitions deal that's been signed. These are positive things between the UK and Poland, as well as what we're doing with others. And I'll tell you one thing, I don't want to lose anything on the basis that we can't produce enough. This is not only a war of the numbers of troops, it's a war and a battle about industrial production. And we've got to actually step up with respect to that as well. And our colleague from General Dynamics, many of you in this room and others, we have to win that industrial production issue as well. And the cooperation like there is between Poland and the UK, but between others, is a really good example of how we do that.
I completely agree, and I like this emphasis that Ukraine has placed on, or the resistance to lowering the draft age to get more bodies out there, because I think the Ukrainians know this is not only about their long-term future, but also the industrial side. And the Army put a lot of pressure on Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1941. They wanted 200 divisions. Roosevelt knew that it was going to be about air power, sea power, and industry, and so he kept the Army at 90 divisions, less than half of what the Army wanted. So it's not just about manpower, although, Robert, I do appreciate the point of your question. Claudia.
Manpower in Germany. Germany just introduced some kind of what we call the Swedish model, a half-voluntary model, to actually have a bigger army. I guess, or it's pretty clear that this halfway voluntary system is not going to be enough. So I think we prepare already mentally for going back to conscription once the whole country understood it. But I would also say this is not enough of an answer. If we agree that the threat is not only military, the military is evident, but the whole panel agreed that there's a huge threat in the grey area between war and peace. It's the cables, the drones, and all that. Then we don't only need soldiers, we need some kind of resilience or other elements. So you need a defense, a deterrence and defense for the military aspect and for the non-military aspect. So then you would actually need to think about a national service for all genders and also, and I say that consciously, all ages. Because why should only the young generation and only the boys go into the military service? If it's an all-comprehensive threat, then we have to find a comprehensive answer. Last tiny point, Ben. We talk about quantity here. If we need more mass, we need more equipment, all that. If we take this idea seriously that we have to move from a US-led defense to a European-led defense, or we have to do a burden shifting, it's not only about quantity, it's also about quality. Our defense, as we think about it in Europe, has an American DNA, thanks to the Americans. They helped us to develop a certain way of deterrence and defense. If we Europeans have to do more of that on our own, it's also about rethinking our concept of defense and think about how a genuinely European way of deterrence and war would look like. Would we defend and fight in the same way like the Americans without the Americans? Probably not. So it's not only about quantity, so many tanks, so many soldiers, so many planes, so many drones, looking at you, Ben. It's also about the DNA behind. It's about the quality. And I think that's the biggest homework, to agree and define a European way of war that looks about political leadership and the way we organize deterrence and defense.
Well said. We're in literally our last 2 minutes. This gentleman, you got to make it super, super short and tell who you want to answer the question. He's right there in the back in the middle. He was the first one with his hand up. Got very quick, please.
Arslan Suleimanov, European Academy of Diplomacy. First of all, thank you so much for the panel. And my question is to Lord Coaker regarding, again, Britain's capability and capacity to withstand deterrence. Because we all know that there was a...
Short question, please.
Yes. Strategic partnership agreement between Britain and Ukraine. So do you think Britain would be able to maintain deterrence in the absence of the European single market? Does it mean that there will be more bilateral treaties signed with the European and other NATO partners? Thank you.
Thank you. We have 1 minute and 28 seconds.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, we are absolutely committed to the defence of Europe, and we will make good that commitment, and we are making good that commitment, and we'll make good that commitment both to Ukraine and to NATO, and our actions I think have demonstrated that. So the short answer to your question is yes, but it's a very important question. But the UK are determined to do that with our European friends, whether it's through NATO as the overarching framework, whether it's through the complementary arrangements that we talked about with Jeff, or the individual bilateral relationships. But in the end, it's all complementing that defence of Ukraine, but also the broader NATO framework.
Thanks, Lord Coaker. You can all go home. You'll not get a better panel than what you just heard the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.